You're looking good, and it feels good to be with you today. Hello, I'm Kendall Bryan Hunter, author of this book, Consider My Servant Job, and this is Come Follow Me. Great for Pioneer Day, and this is Come Follow Me, get to the point, where I always show up, I always come prepared, we never take roll, and it's bring your own refreshments. Luncheon meat. So this is a great value luncheon meat, Spam. This stuff's great for your food storage because you can eat the food raw and it gives you a nice sense of protein. It's 25% recommended sodium, but, well, that may be a trade-off. You'd rather get sodium rather than starve to death. So, some housekeeping. First of all, aside from selling my book, I don't do any merchandising, so you're not going to get any t-shirts or any bobbleheads. If you need a bobblehead, there you go. Yeah, you can make a GIF of that if you want, a GIF, whatever you call it. I'm also starting to post these videos up on Rumble and sort of kind of what am I going to do once we hit the end of Come Follow Me after 4 years? I don't know, but I'm still looking to look into things. Well, news. The Sci Post had this story that YouTubers can fulfill emotional needs better than casual friends, a study suggests. Here's another section on the news. Book of Mormon perspectives on current events. Ezra Taft Benson said, "The prophets, particularly the Book of Mormon, saw our day. You'll learn more from studying and reading the Book of Mormon about our current problems than you will by reading the daily paper or the Slick magazines." Slick magazines means like Time, Newsweek, U.S. News and World Report, People Magazine, that type of thing. That's from Teachings of Ezra Taft Benson, page 62. So here's some three things. First of all, you notice that when King Benjamin got old, he knew it was time to step aside, to abdicate the throne. In the Book of Mormon, there were 3 disputed elections, and we talked about one already with the Amlicites. The other one is with the Kingmen, which we'll get to later in the Book of Mormon. Then you have the My Three Sons election in Helaman chapter 1. So with what happened on January 6th, are there parallels? Are there differences? You can form your own opinion. You don't need me to force-feed an opinion to you. No, I don't do eat my opinions. You're intelligent enough to do what you need to do. The last ones is after the recent presidential debate between President Biden and President Trump, 33% said that Biden won the debate. Now, that was the same percentage that voted for Lucifer and the War in Heaven, and that's actually a CNN poll who hosted the debate. Honestly, I thought it was a good debate. I thought the moderators were fair, and muting the mics was a good approach. There was a little bit of a problem with that. Some of the past debates about people over talking was very rude and inconsiderate, and you have to put a structural thing in there to get people to be polite. So today's theme: Swords of Rebellion, buried. Yeah, I keep the sword around. So, in this section, I'm not going to do a chapter by chapter. I'll cover topics. So, first of all, after the 2 kings, Lamoni and Lamoni's father, get converted, Lamoni's father, who is an Ishmaelite Lamanite, not a Lamanite or a Lemuelite Lamanite, he proclaims religious freedom. And it says that once they did that, religious freedom among the Lamanite lands. After that, thousands were converted. And there's a need to talk about is that the church has information about this, but I'm not sure it's saturating down to the ward level or in the home level about the need for religious freedom. So I have a link to the church's site. You can go there and look up religious freedom topics. And we're going to talk about this later on in this with some more detail. And there's utility aspect to religion. This is what the Book of Mormon says. The King Lamoni's father wanted the missionaries to teach his people that his people might be convinced concerning their wicked traditions of their fathers, and that they might be convinced that they were all brethren, and they ought not to murder, nor to plunder, nor to steal, nor to commit adultery, nor to commit any matter of wickedness. So there's a social utility aspect to faith. Atheists are happy to talk about the negative aspects of being a believer, but what are the positive aspects of that? Now, secondly, there's obvious social utility to people being faithful members of a church or having religiosity. And now, are these the negatives and the positives? Do the positives outweigh the negative aspects of utility of having faith? And also, another question is social utility enough reason to be a person of faith? When, like I said, it'll hint at that a little bit. So there's a correspondence among the Lamanites and Nephites. It's a bit like the openness that you have in the United States of America. So each 50 states, and each state is its own country, but there's a larger country, the United States of America, and so we have interstate commerce, and that keeps things prosperous as opposed to the issue where you have international borders. And it's interesting because you have these most favored nation policies, like with the United States and Canada. There's differences, but we're fairly open with each other. Now, let me pause this for a second. Sorry about that pause. Now, talk about the name, the anti-Lehi Nephites, or the anti-Lehi Nephites, sometimes incorrectly called the anti-Nephi Lehis. Did I type that in? Yeah, anti-Nephi Lehis. I typed that in wrong. I apologize. I'm part of the problem. Now, the name, it kind of creates some confusion because you think anti is against, or you opposed to, but it could be next to is that the city, it refers to the city of Lehi and Nephi, that might actually, it could be the name of a city. It's that the people who are part of the city, and it's not anti. It creates some confusion. I'm sorry, I'm not explaining it well. Now, he's also, this is the name of a person. It's the older brother. Sorry, I'm doing this on the fly, which I like doing it. A&L, the anti-Nephi Lehis, or double-checked in the Book of Mormon. Anti-Nephi Lehis, I typed that in wrong. So the anti-Nephi Lehis, Lehi Nephi is a location, and it's not being opposed to, like you say, you're anti-war or what have you. But it's also the name of Lamoni's elder brother, who inherits the kingdom after King Lamoni's father dies. And so they take upon, that's the name, or it could be a throne name he has, or that could be his birth name. So like I said, don't get tripped up with that name. I'm sorry, I should have thought this through a little bit better. Like I said, I'm doing this a little bit on the fly. So what the anti-Nephi Lehis do is they bury their weapons. And this is the famous thing. We have in America burying the hatchet, but they take their weapons, their swords, and they bury them. And they explain this, the reason why they do that is it's just a memorial. They were so sick and tired of how they fought with the Nephites that they bury them. They called them the weapons of rebellion. They buried their weapons of war for peace. And it's interesting because it shows the depth of their conversion. If on a missionary, you have people still struggling with drinking coffee or smoking cigarettes, but getting people to say, okay, we're going to do this, we're not going to look back on that. Elder Richard G. Scott, October 2013 conference, talked about that, how these group of Lamanites, the anti-Nephi Lehis, had this inclination to violence that they developed, and so in order to counteract that, they had to bury their swords. And it's not something they imposed upon their children or their spouses, or as a philosophical thing. It was more of a personal choice. And so this raises the question, is the doctrine of Christ pacifist? I'll cover that. I'm going to have a section on all these questions. I'm asking the questions now. You mull over them, and then we'll get to them. So you have some of the Lamanites get converted and some don't. And the Lamanites have these other groups, the Amulonites and the Amalekites. And these two groups are neo-apostate groups. The Lamanites are paleo-apostates, and these are the recent apostates. Amulonites, the priest of Amulon, who's a priest of King Noah, and Amalekites, we don't know anything about them. And they got really angry about the conversion, and they persuaded the Lamanites to go to war with the Nephites. And I don't understand this control issue. Why? Okay, look, you want to leave, fine, I'll respect your choice, so move on. It's a little bit like when you have people who leave the church, are you respectful of their choice, not agreeing with it, not supporting it, but recognizing a person's choice to leave the church? Or do you have control issues? Are you using unrighteous dominion to keep people in the church? So what happened is the Lamanites go to war, and the people of Ammon, the anti-Nephi Lehis, they kneel down, they praise God, and the Lamanites come in with their swords and start hacking them and slicing them, and the people of Ammon, the anti-Nephi Lehis, They offered no resistance. They pray and praise God as they're being killed. And about 1,000 of them, 1,005 get killed, but in the process, something happens to the Lamanites, and they stop attacking them, and their hearts are moved, and they throw down their swords and then join the anti-Nephi Lehis. What happens is that there's a shift in political opinion or social consciousness, the zeitgeist, and the Lamanites turn on the Amulonites and the people of the Amalekites, and they start hunting down the Amulonites and kill them to extinction. And the Book of Mormon mentions, this is part of the Abinadi's death curse he put upon them. That, they're going to, what you do to me is going to happen to you, and it happened to their children. Generational curses. So let's look back at that. So chapter 27 is a flashback where we've been talking about these past few chapters as a flashback, so it comes back full circle where Alma and the sons of Mosiah meet, and they talk about slavery among the Nephites, and they said, let's take the people of Ammon and put them under Nephite protection, because we don't allow slavery. You're not going to have to be our slaves, but we'll put you to an ear, and we'll see what happens with that. We'll talk to the people about that. So chapter 28 has a section on battles, thus we see chapters. And then chapter 29, that's, oh, that I were an angel. And Alma the younger feels very left out. He stayed home and was chief judge and fought battles, and his brethren in wickedness, now brethren in righteousness, were able to do missionary work, and you can tell he wanted to be part of it. Dallin H. Oaks talked about desires in April 2011, and you can review that talk. So here's the question and issues. The need for religious freedom. Lamoni's father proclaimed freedom. Now, there's arguments against religious freedom. You have attacks like 9/11, Under the Banner of Heaven, Mount Meadows Massacre, Lafferty murders, Chad Daybell most recently. Just as a disclaimer, I know Chad Daybell. He was this is strange. He was an editor. He was the editor for my book. So book was edited by a murderer. I hope he doesn't put you off from buying the books, but I had to be transparent with you. Atheists and people see religion as being oppressive, violating personal choice. Spanish Inquisition promotes child abuse among the Catholics. It's anti-feminism, anti-LGBTQ. In fact, 2 days before the 4th of July this year, this is the New York Times had this editorial called "The First Amendment is Out of Control." The First Amendment is out of control, New York Times. So let's talk about some principles. First of all, freedom in general is essential to human existence. It's a human right. And so here's a quick thing. You have freedom in general. You have religious freedom. You have financial or economic freedom. You have relationship freedom. And you have political freedom. So if you remove one of these, you're actually indirectly doing an attack upon freedom in general. Say, okay, we're going to limit your religious freedom. But that's an attack on freedom in general, and you can't have one without the others. It's a package deal. People say, well, I have free speech, but what you say is hate speech. Well, that's a double standard. You need all of these. It's an incoherent thing where we're going to limit people's free speech. People talk about the dangers of faith, but there's also dangers of having a free market. You get income disparity. There's dangers of relationship freedom, that sometimes people don't like each other, and you sometimes get this de facto rather than de jure segregation. Person has the right to express their ideas about sexual identities, but not about faith. Certain opinions are legal and certain opinions are illegal. Now, you need to have free speech. You also have the double effect. And this comes back from Thomas Aquinas, but it's an ethical principle. If you have a principle and you intend good consequences, but there's also inherent negative consequences that you don't intend, it's still a valid principle. There's always hazards with freedom, and we fought about that in the War in Heaven, but you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Abusus non tollit usum, a Latin phrase that abuse does not cancel use. Having a good principle that gets treated wrongly doesn't invalidate the good principle. You have abuses of faith and abuses of economics and abuses of freedom, but it's still a good principle. Fraud, slander, libel are not part of free speech, and also human sacrifices are not part of religious freedom, we sometimes get in these idiotic debates, but common sense will let you know better. We have it. That comes in with BYU lawyers defending people who use Native Americans who use peyote. Elder Robert D. Hales talked about preserving agency and protecting religious freedom, because religious freedom is part of agency. You take away freedom of speech or freedom of religion, you're taking away everything else. Freedom to believe, freedom to share our faith, freedom to form a religious organization and to worship, the freedom to live our faith. Well, you have religion and faith, you just can't live it. Elder Hale says we can become informed. We need to join with others who share our commitment to freedom, working side by side with people of other faiths. It's you don't see these squabbles among Christian denominations. Protestants and Jews and Catholics, they all get along really well, because the biggest issue is people who want to destroy faith and destroy our freedom to worship. And the third example President Elder Hales talks about was to live your life to be a good example. Remember, the devil wanted to silence freedom and remove freedom of faith during the war in heaven. That was his plan. So, utility of faith. Certainly there's a utility aspect, and there's positive and negatives, but having a testimony based on the utility of faith is not sufficient. There's short-term utility and long-term utility, and if something is a false principle, if religion is false, that would invalidate the utility principle. Now, here's another question, is that the people of Ammon, the anti-Nephi Lehi's, were pacifists, radical pacifists, and they allowed themselves to be killed. So is the Doctrine of Christ pacifist? Well, in the pro side of that question, you have Christ as the Prince of Peace. That's a term applies to Melchizedek and to Abraham. Read the Book of Abraham. President Nelson talked about this in April 2023, called Peacemakers Needed. Also in October 2002, he talked about blessed are the peacemakers. So October 2002 was a year after 9/11, so keep that talking in the context of 9/11 and the terrorism attack. So we want to be peacemakers. No one's advocating war. But on the con side, you have the sword of Laban. I'm getting a lot of mileage out of this prop. So Nephi beheading Laban with the sword of Laban. King Benjamin wielding the sword of Laban as he goes to war with the Lamanites. Zenith. He saw much what was good among the Lamanites and wanted to have a peaceful coexistence with them. But they stabbed him in the back, and so he ends up having to forge swords and to arm his people. He started out as a pacifist, and he ended up forming swords. Captain Moroni. Alma, just war theory. Alma 43, Doctrine and Covenants 98, talk about just war theory. The war in heaven. If you're a pacifist, you disavow your actions in the war in heaven. Now, what's interesting is that the anti-Nephi Lehi's did not impose this upon their children. It wasn't a philosophical issue, as you have with the Mennonites and the Amish and with Jehovah's Witnesses. But it was a personal choice, as Elder Scott talked about that. And it's interesting with modern pacifism. You have Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, and the Hindu principle of ahisma, which is nonviolence against living things. But you have what President Hinckley taught during 9/11. Of course, his October 2001 talk, a few weeks after the 9/11 attacks. And in April 2003, President Hinckley said, "I believe that God will not hold men and women in uniform responsible as agents of their government in carrying forward that which they are legally obligated to do. It may even be that he will hold us responsible if we try to impede or hedge up the way of those who are involved in a contest with the forces of evil and repression." So, context of protesters preventing soldiers and shipping arms. I remember this back in September 1987. There's this Vietnam veteran. His name was Brian Wilson, and not the Beach Boy, but he was a Vietnam veteran activist. And he was laying on the tracks to the Concord Naval Weapons Station, and there's a train coming with some weapons. So he's on the track, and you cannot stop the train. So what happened is he didn't get off on time, and he lost both of his feet. This is tragic. You respect his point of view, but he is trying to stop soldiers from protecting people. I remember talking with some of the Mennonites about that. Is like you're going to stand still as someone's getting beat up. So, question. So I haven't resolved an answer. Form your own opinion. Issues of generational curses and Amulonites. Well, the second article of faith says that men will be punished for their own sins and not for Adam's transgression. On the other hand, in the Ten Commandments, it talks about visiting curses upon generations. Then you have the obvious effect of families, a parent who will apostatize and their children get raised up in that culture of apostasy. For example, over 100 years ago, we had an apostle. His name was Moses Thatcher. And there was a political discussion during the Wilford Woodruff's presidency when Utah became a state, and he felt like he was a Democrat. He felt like the Republicans, Joseph F. Smith, were treating him unfairly. And so Wilford Woodruff put his foot down and said, we're going to have this thing called the Political Manifesto, and we want all the general authorities to sign it. It's a bit like our policy now. So stake presidents down can be involved in politics. Area 70s upward cannot be involved in politics. And so what happened is B.H. Roberts and Moses Thatcher held out. Finally, B.H. Roberts signed it. He kept his place as a general authority. Moses Thatcher didn't. And he was dropped from the quorum of the 12 apostles. I grew up with his great-grandchildren, and they are still out of the church. So you have the second article of faith, and you have that obvious experience. I have an ancestor of mine, named of Austin Cowles, who contributed to the Nauvoo Expositor. He's a stake president, or counselor in the stake presidency in Nauvoo, and turned on Joseph Smith. He was one of the people who had wanted to kill Joseph Smith and slit his throat. Joseph Smith made that statement from the stand, is that some people on the stand wanted to, if he told them everything he knew, they'd killed him. And some evidence suggests that it was referring to my third great-grandfather, Austin Cowles. I'm related to Isaac Haight, who is stake president in Mountain Meadows. I'm also related to William Dane, who is head of the militia at Mountain Meadows. Now, that's not the only thing. I'm also related to Edward Hunter, so there's a lot going on in my ancestry, and there's a simple, you see it go on, but it doesn't happen in every case. And the answer I have is this will all get balanced out in the next life, but you do see this generational curses going on. It's not God, it's people's behavior. Issue of slavery. So we've always had slavery, and it wasn't invented by George Washington or the colonies. It's something that's just always been there. You read about that in the Bible. The law of Moses regulated a pre-existing condition. The law of Moses is a lesser law, so it wasn't advocating. There weren't a situation where people were free, and then the law of Moses came and said, okay, we're going to start, slavery is okay. It was regulating something that was existing in a lesser law fashion. If they had the full Melchizedek law, of course, it wouldn't be slavery. Plus, you also had slave. You can only be a slave for 7 years, and afterwards, if you wanted to be a slave, you could choose to be a slave to a household. Sometimes people wanted to be slaves in a household. I'm not advocating that now. That doesn't work. That's the law of Moses, the lesser law, but it was a historical fact. Watch Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur starts out as a slave to the Roman and later gets adopted into his household. Slaves would be free after 7 years. They had rights under it. It wasn't the perfect thing. Like I said, it's the lesser law. Slavery is mentioned in Section 136. It was a painful trade-off. The church had to manage a pre-existing condition. To be honest with you, the church, I'm not sure if the church could have changed slavery, because it took, in the United States of America, it took a bloody war. 360,000 on the Union side and 258,000 on the Confederacy fighting for this. I wish we could have done this. I'm glad it's over. Of course, there are lingering effects of slavery, and racial tensions are out there, and I'm glad that the prophet has spoken out against racism and racial tensions, but and we're in a situation where we don't have slavery. So another question, so are you clear on that? Refugees versus immigration. The anti-Nephi Lehis were refugees from a war-torn country. The church had I Was a Stranger program for dealing with refugees. There's a difference between being a refugee and being an immigrant. And a refugee is like a temporary situation, where immigrants is more of a permanent one. And so don't confuse being refugee programs with immigration policy, which is handed by Congress, not the president. It's the Congress's job to come up with immigration policy for a uniform standard. So the people of Ammon, sometimes it's a mixture of both. The refugees sometimes become immigrants. And we do things legally according to wisdom and order and our strength and our means. So here's the big question. Alma 26:22 talks about baptizing thousands of people. Why doesn't this go on? Well, sometimes it goes on in South America, and you have a high end in some countries where you have high baptismal rates and high drop-off rates. That didn't happen with the people of Ammon. I'm kind of curious why it didn't happen in that area, why you have that. Jeremiah talks about 3:14, one of a city and two of a family. What was going on that was different with the Lamanites, the paleo-apostate Lamanites versus the neo-apostates, who really had one of the people of Ammon, one of the Amulonites get converted? I don't know. It's an interesting phenomenon. Elder David A. Bednar tells us. Let me skip over this. It's from April 2002. I'm running a little bit longer than I should be. So why are the people of the anti-Nephi Lehi's, why do they convert, and why are they so solid? And I think it was about 3rd Nephi where the Lamanites started, or the people of Ammon started caving into cultural pressures. They're in the same situation. They had the same social pressures and background, but something made them stick, and I don't know why. It's like with Wilford Woodruff. How could Wilford Woodruff baptize all those people? Now, he wasn't constantly doing it, but in these certain situations where he could walk into a city and deliver one sermon, convert the pastors, and convert congregations. It's possible. I don't know how it's done, but it's something to think about. More importantly, what's your conversion like? Yeah, you're born in the covenant and you're a heritage member like I am, but you still need to be converted. You have to get converted like the people of Ammon. At 26 minutes, and I have 38 minutes left on my tablet, so let's get to the Christ quotient. Are you recognizing Christ's ability, the doctrine of Christ's ability to deal with these questions about conversion and slavery and freedom and religious freedom? Are you accepting Christ's answers? Are you bearing your weapons of rebellion? Are you holding on to them? Are you being like the people of Ammon and say, I will surrender everything to follow Christ? What's holding you back? What's one weapon that you're clinging on to that you don't want to give up? Lastly, are you being converted to Christ? Having these powerful conversion like the people of Ammon? Because converted to Christ, that's the point.